Many people believe that Xennials feel out of place, simply because they are caught right between Gen X and Millennials. But the deeper reason goes much further than that. A part of their mind was programmed for a world that completely vanished before they could even finish growing up. This video will break down how the transition from an analog to a digital world quietly shaped the exact way you handle attention, uncertainty, connection, and change in your life today. You leave the office and habitually slip your phone into your pocket. Just a few minutes pass without looking at the screen, and your hand suddenly reaches back into your pocket and pulls it out in an unconscious reflex. No new messages, no emergencies. In fact, absolutely nothing happened. What's strange here is that you are the exact same person who remembers a time when nobody could reach you for hours on end. You still vividly remember entire afternoons that completely disappeared without status updates, without app notifications, and without any proof needed to show that you existed in the world. One part of you learned to adapt to today's constant connectivity, but another part never completely compromised with it. If you were born during the late Gen X or early millennial years, that internal friction is not random at all. It comes from the fact that you grew up right in the middle of one of the fastest cultural transitions in modern history. You didn't just watch that shift happen as a bystander. Your very identity was shaped by it. And if any of this sounds oddly familiar to you, please stay with me. You might just recognize more hidden sides of yourself than you expect. Because before smartphones, social media, and this permanent connectivity ruled the world, there was something else that used to be completely normal, and that was being unreachable. Think back to the days when you'd grab your bike, head out the door, and absolutely nobody knew where you were. Back then, that was completely normal. Your parents only expected one thing: be back by dinner. No cell phone in your pocket, no location sharing, and no status updates every 5 minutes. For an entire afternoon, you completely vanished off the world's radar. It was in that space that your brain learned something incredibly special. Absence is safe. You understood that you didn't need to be in constant contact for the people who loved you to feel secure. But modern life has completely changed the game, turning constant availability into an unspoken obligation. And a part of you is still quietly resisting that expectation. That's why every time your phone buzzes with a new text or call, you find yourself sighing and wondering, when did answering everyone start feeling like a full-time job? Back then, nobody knew. The truth is, you don't actually miss the old phones. What you really miss is the feeling of not being monitored. And that wasn't the only thing your brain learned from that disconnected world. You spent your entire childhood waiting for things that now arrive with a single tap. But the strange thing is, you barely even noticed the delay back then. You used to patiently wait a whole week just to get a roll of film developed. You would willingly stay home all day, just waiting for a landline call from your best friend. Even if you happened to miss an episode of your favorite TV show, you quietly accepted that you'd just have to wait for next week's rerun. That delayed gratification code slowly trained your nervous system to build an incredible amount of patience. Information back then arrived in batches, not in the relentless non-stop stream we experience today. But today's constantly stimulated world has created a quiet mismatch inside you. The endless stream of updates and notifications feels completely normal to everyone else around you, and that exact difference is why you find yourself exhausted by things that younger generations don't even notice. Throughout those early years, nothing happened for days on end. But you forgot that the very boredom you tried to escape back then was actually a weight room for your mind. Then, the environment changed faster than your identity could ever keep up with. Most generations inherit just one reality throughout their lives, but you inherited two completely different worlds. You lived right through the heart of a historic transition, where handwritten notes passed in class suddenly turned into instant messages. Dusty landlines on the wall were quickly replaced by cell phones in your pocket, and eventually, your entire childhood friend group migrated online. The core truth is, you didn't just stand by and watch this digital shift happen as an observer. The very formation of your identity was happening at the exact same time as that cultural earthquake. The old habits of the past and the new systems of the future developed side by side right inside of you. Because of that, you never received one stable, defined blueprint of what adulthood was supposed to look like. Every time you look back, you get this vague feeling that everything changed before you could even figure out who you really were. The rules changed first. You learned to adapt to the new world before you could ever understand what that adaptation would actually cost you. And that precise cosmic mismatch accidentally built a superpower inside you that almost nobody else notices. One part of you still vividly remembers the feeling of scarcity, but another part is constantly running in a world of absolute abundance. You belong to the generation that only started using computers after your childhood years were already over. You had to learn internet culture as a young adult, watching entire lifelong routines completely vanish overnight. This massive technological shift just happened to overlap with the years your brain had its highest neuroplasticity and shaping power. As a result, both of these opposite thinking systems became deeply encoded into your neural pathways, and that created a hidden cost, making you frequently feel split in half without ever knowing why. Sometimes, you realize the ironic truth that you deeply understand both worlds, but you don't fully belong to either one of them. Both systems stayed. You never wiped out the old operating system to replace it with the new. You chose to stack them on top of each other. And right there, at that complex intersection, a hidden advantage begins to show up. You can sit through a face-to-face conversation for hours with incredible depth. Yet that very same afternoon, you can easily teach yourself and master a brand new software. You feel perfectly natural disconnecting entirely to live in the physical world, but you have no trouble navigating the online space either. You can smoothly guide yourself through both of these completely opposite environments. Living through those contradictory realities built a beautiful flexibility in your brain. Instead of creating a blind dependency on technology, multiple models of reality remain fully accessible inside your mind at any moment. But this rare flexibility often comes with an invisible weight, making you feel like an outsider looking in. Sometimes, a passing thought makes you wonder, maybe that's why I never feel fully at home anywhere. That's the trade. The exact thing that makes you adaptable is the very thing that makes you feel different from everyone else. And that extraordinary adaptability came with a profound loss that almost nobody talks about. Most people think nostalgia is just a simple longing for old, outdated objects, but the truth is usually not like that. You don't actually miss brick phones or obsolete rolls of film. What you really crave is the peaceful psychological space that used to exist before the world was consumed by non-stop connectivity. It was a world with no read receipts, no relentless app notifications, and absolutely no unspoken pressure to respond immediately. Back then, human attention had natural boundaries to protect the mind. But modern technological systems have ruthlessly stripped almost all of those sacred boundaries away. Because of that, peaceful solitude has become a luxury that requires exhausting effort to achieve. The process of mental recovery now has to be done with fierce intention. Have you ever quietly admitted to yourself, "I don't want less technology. I just want more silence"? That silence used to happen completely automatically. You are not missing the past. You are missing a free state of mind that you used to own. And right at that moment, another event arrived to deeply engrave this exact lesson into your life. Just as your journey into adulthood began, the floor beneath your feet suddenly moved. You entered the job market and started building a career right in the middle of major global economic instability. Future plans were forced to delay, and your youthful expectations were ruthlessly interrupted. That early uncertainty and scarcity during your formative years completely reshaped how your brain perceives risk. Your nervous system was put on high alert, constantly preparing to handle the next shock that could arrive at any moment. The cost is that current stability and security rarely feel permanent to you. Even when everything in your life is going perfectly fine right now, you still can't stop yourself from constantly checking and guarding against worst-case scenarios. The actual threat left, but the high vigilance stayed. You learned the hard lesson that major systems can fail, long before anyone else around you ever realized it. And that defensive mindset now leads you straight into one final contradiction. You seem too young to write a chapter in the story of the older generation, but you are already too old to fully blend into the world of those who followed. You realize that you hold core life values that are completely different from those older than you. Yet, you can't share the same basic assumptions and mindsets of the younger crowd either. The rhythm of life forces you to constantly play the role of an unspoken translator, quietly translating the language of thought between two opposite worlds every single day. The very foundation of your identity was shaped right on the borderline of two cultural realities. Because of that, both of those contrasting lenses still coexist and remain intensely active inside your mind. The ultimate cost of this is a permanent feeling of standing slightly outside, just a bit detached from the rest of the crowd. Sometimes, a deep thought quietly drifts into your mind. Maybe from the very beginning, you were never meant to fit perfectly into any one place. That is not a failure. You became the bridge between two worlds, simply because you were the one who actually lived through the crossing of that historic shift. And that quiet understanding finally unlocks the true meaning of the entire journey you've been walking. Maybe the defining feature of your generation was never technology. It was adaptation. Not the kind of adaptation that happens after years of preparation, but the kind that appears while the ground beneath your feet is still constantly moving. You learned the new rules of the game before the old ones even had time to disappear, and you chose to carry both worlds at the exact same time. That might be why certain parts of modern life feel completely obvious to you, while other parts still bring an unfamiliar feeling that feels strangely unnatural. You belong to one of the few groups of people who can clearly remember both versions of the world to make a complete comparison. You don't remember it through stories told by others. You remember it through actual, raw feeling. The feeling of patiently waiting for something. The feeling of completely disappearing into a long afternoon. And the feeling when human attention still had sacred boundaries left to protect it. You weren't raised in the world you live in today, but somehow you still learned how to survive and master it anyway. At this point, I am incredibly curious about one thing. What is one habit from the world before smartphones that stayed with you and never left? Not an old piece of technology, but a habit. Something you still do every single day in an unconscious reflex. And if you love exploring the hidden ways where past experiences shape who we are today, please consider subscribing to the channel. That is the core value this channel truly aims for. Looking back at very familiar things deeply enough to notice the faint traces they accidentally left behind. Some people will only remember the old devices, but you probably remember the silence of those years. And that is a completely different kind of memory.